Triangulation is one of the most common forms of social manipulation dynamics. It's super common in the workplace, and it's the preferred tactic for haters. But here's the thing. Every one of us is engaged in triangulation at some point in our lives. Triangulation occurs when instead of communicating with someone directly, we go to another third person to talk about that person or complain against them with the subconscious intention, sometimes conscious intention, of getting them to side with us against the other person. We may use them as an in-between to relay information to the person we have a conflict with as well, but this is not the same thing as an intermediary because the subconscious intention in triangulation is to divide. We're using one person against the other. Subconsciously, we think our only way of maintaining our self-concept of being a good person is to get the other person to validate that we are the one that's the good one in the conflict. The way to do this is to get that person to have an issue with the person we have an issue with, too. We have decided that the best way to get somebody to side with us is if they'll see us as a victim. We live in a society that sees the victim as the good guy in all scenarios. So, the way that we preserve our self-concept and get them to side with us is to see us as good and see the other one as bad. Because it's so important to be the victim in order to be seen as good, we have several strategies for looking like the victim, even in situations where we're really not the victim. To understand more about this, I want you to watch a video. The first video is the triangle from hell, the victim-villain-hero dynamic. And the second is the victim-control dynamic, escaping control drama in relationships. I highly suggest you watch these videos to gain full awareness of these patterns. Most people, frankly, have no idea that they're being triangulated, for one glaring reason. The reason is that the person that is doing the triangulating is never going to come outright and say, I want you to turn against this person. Instead, they're going to make it seem exactly the opposite. They're going to be covert about it. They will gaslight, lie, and do anything that makes it look otherwise so as to never have their tactic, which is often highly subconscious, be seen. And the most common camouflage they use is other people's insecurities. As people, we are incredibly skilled at creating transactions in order to get our needs met. We have a sixth sense for what other people's unmet needs are, because we know that by meeting those needs, we can hook them into meeting our needs as the exchange. But right here is where we have the fertile ground for manipulation. Wherever we have an intense need, to the flip side of that, we have an intense insecurity. For example, if it's an intense need to belong, it comes along with an intense fear of not belonging. If we're really good at triangulating, what we're going to do is we're going to play the person's insecurities against the person who we have the original conflict with. At the same time as we do that, we're going to give that person who we're triangulating against the other person the impression that we are going to be the ones to meet their unmet need. This is especially easy to do when people are lonely. When this is the case, all we have to do is give the person we are subconsciously trying to triangulate the impression that they can have the closeness with us through opposing the other person. It is to find unity through a common enemy. It is to use division with someone as a way to gain closeness with someone else. The reason that the person who is being triangulated hardly ever sees what's actually going on is because the person who is triangulating is going to camouflage their own triangulation underneath an insecurity, a wound, or an unmet need that that person already has with the person they're trying to triangulate that person against. What they're doing, essentially, is to make a crack, a Grand Canyon. This gets the person doing the triangulating the validation in their feeling of being a victim and the validation that their claims against the one being triangulated against are credible. But the person being triangulated isn't aware of any of that. What they are aware of is that this crack, which is now a Grand Canyon, definitely existed way before this other person had a conflict with that person. So instead you feel validated for that crack you never dealt with. So this means that person doesn't attribute the Grand Canyon to the triangulator at all. In fact, they own the entire conflict as their own. At this point, they become a defender. The small issue that they themselves did not directly resolve with the person, now when fueled by the triangulator, becomes a forest fire. The one doing the triangulating has successfully managed to camouflage their own agenda like a chameleon in such a way that the person being turned against the person the triangulator has the conflict with mistakes the agenda for their own. Here is an example. We have person A, B, and C. Person A has a conflict with person B. So person A goes to person C about that conflict. Person A knows that person C feels insignificant to person B. Therefore, person A begins to complain about how insignificant person B makes him or her feel and suggests that person B really should value and prioritize person C more. Person A then proceeds to give person C the impression that they value them and will prioritize them. This fuels the pain between person B and person C. Person B will then act as a carrier of that conflict between person A and person C. Person B will be convinced the true victim is person A. Person B has been manipulated into identifying with person A. Person B will then defend person A and try to resolve the conflict for person A when what they are really doing is standing up for themselves against person C, but indirectly. Person A has successfully played person B against person C, and they can continue to do this over and over until they have accrued an army and divided everyone against the person they have the conflict with. If you grew up in a dysfunctional family dynamic, this kind of chess game of triangulation is part of the common interaction in your family. It's so much a part of your social upbringing that you don't even see there being anything wrong with it. It's normalized. You see this as the way social interaction goes. You also see this as the only way to get connection. Basically, whenever conflict arose, you learned in a dysfunctional family that there was no other way to create any kind of connection or to create any kind of solution, because resolve was not really an option, because the members of your family weren't really after that. If you want a good example of triangulation, watch Season 4, Episode 1 of the TV show Law & Order: Criminal Intent. This episode is titled Semi-Detached. But what should you do to avoid triangulation and to make sure you're not being triangulated? 1. Figure out your needs and meet those needs directly. What most people don't understand is that triangulation is manipulation, and manipulation is only ever about needs. Needs that cannot be expressed directly, and so they are achieved indirectly. This means that there's no malicious intent behind manipulation, regardless of whether it destroys lives. To understand more about this, I want you to watch my video titled Meet Your Needs. 2. Deal with conflict the second that it arises when it's very, very small. Most of us hate conflict. Some of us really hate conflict. So what we do when we feel that tiny bit of resistance where there's a little bit of conflict is we stuff it down, we suppress it, and we continue on and build resentment. And then this doesn't go away, like any type of issue doesn't. Instead, it builds up and builds up and builds up until we're only ready to address that conflict when we're at a level 10. A rupture that's at a level 10 point is very difficult to repair because it usually involves several incidents instead of one incident. When we begin to repair these situations of conflict, when they're very, very small and directly with the person we have the conflict with, it doesn't escalate. Not only that, we find out that we can create repair and create repair and create repair, and so we begin to feel a sense of security within the relationship, and security within a relationship leads to deep feelings of trust. Another thing is, if we resolve the conflict we have with someone when it's a very small crack within our relationship, then there is no opportunity for anybody to use that crack to create a Grand Canyon to triangulate us against someone else. I promise you that facing a conflict when it's at a level 2 is a lot less scary. And so it's a lot more likely, if you address things at a level 2, that you can do so without needing all kinds of backup. And so you'll be less likely to triangulate. Watch yourself very closely, because many people are very two-faced, but they're not aware of their own two-faced behavior. So ask yourself the question, do you say something different to someone's face than you say behind their back? Anytime we're being two-faced, the door is wide open for triangulation. Most of us are passive-aggressive because we feel intimidated by the person that we have the conflict with. But I promise you, if you're not brave enough to directly address that person head-on, then the door is also wide open for you to be manipulative, which is much less of the person that you want to be. 3. Try to figure out what someone actually needs and wants in a situation, in general, but also in a conflict. What is their actual intent of telling you what they're telling you? Ask the person who is triangulating directly what they want out of telling you what they're telling you. Ask if they're just venting or if they're expecting you to do something. Oftentimes, you'll be able to feel the truth of why, even if their words sound as if their intentions are good. If they are venting, you should still encourage them to talk directly to the source. This questioning, though, will help the person to think about what they are actually doing. If they want to be defended and sided with against someone, they should have to say that directly. There is a very different feel to a situation when a person's really coming to us to gain insight about how to resolve a situation, and when a person's coming to us to relieve anxiety and feel connected through division. In a conflict, it is natural that we want support, and it's natural for us to go to people to get that support. There's nothing wrong with that. Where stuff gets hazy is in our intentions, our subconscious intentions, when we go about doing that. Where it's hazy is when we start to manipulate in order to get those subconscious needs met. And then the support we think we're getting or going for turns into something different entirely. When we feel like we're in pain because of a situation, so we're running to somebody for support, most of us, if we're totally honest, want people to side with us in that we're wronged. Now, if they do that, obviously, it makes the other person the bad guy and us the good guy. This helps you to avoid shame. In conflicts, shame naturally arises. So if there's a conflict, I'm naturally going to start doubting whether I'm the good guy or whether I'm the bad guy or whether I did something right or whether I did something wrong. Weaving people into this for support in being wronged, the one that's wronged, means that I can absolve myself of my shame. It also puts other people in the position where I really do want them to be doing something to prove that I was the one that was wronged, or to show me that I was the one that was wronged, such as defending me as if I'm the underdog. This feels soothing and safe because when you do this, you're creating an alliance or partnership with a person. An alliance that also makes you feel good about yourself. Regardless of whether you intended it or not, this creates a two people against one dynamic. This is very difficult to undo, and you may be responsible for ruining several relationships. Also, you can feel that sense of alliance. 4. We often fall into the trap of telling ourselves that everyone on the planet wants resolution. This isn't always the case. That's especially true if what a person is wanting is self-esteem. If an injury that they've suffered in a conflict makes them feel like they're the bad guy, it's very common that a person, especially the lower their self-esteem is, will want to be the good guy no matter what. Now, when this is the case, they have to have a bad guy. So creating a resolution with you doesn't actually enable them to do that. In other words, creating a resolution is contrary to their actual need, which is to feel good about themselves, which they think at this moment is only going to be achieved by being the good guy, which means you have to be the bad guy. 5. Pay special attention whenever somebody says something that either creates or fuels a problem between you and the other person. This is when a little bell in your head should go off. What is this person going for? Why are they doing this? Also, very important that when this bell goes off, you realize that two people involved in a conflict often have completely different perceptual realities about the actual situation at hand. And anytime you talk to one side of this party, you are getting a biased opinion. Here's another thing. Getting information through third party is completely unreliable. 6, this is probably the best news I'm going to give you all day. We can use any situation in which we are being triangulated to actually create a closer relationship with the person who is being triangulated against. Here's why. Because the triangulator who's skilled is always going to use an insecurity or a crack that already exists between you and the other person, you may be unaware on a conscious level of this crack that you've suppressed. But when they start to triangulate you, believe me, you will be aware of the issue you have with this other person. That's the opportunity. At that moment that you're feeling your own conflict with that person magnified, go directly to that person and address your conflict with them, but leaving the person who's triangulating and their issue out of it completely. For example, using the previous scenario, person B should come to person C and talk about their feelings of insignificance and feeling not prioritized. And this talk should have nothing to do with person A at all. By resolving this issue directly, we can remain a neutral party in the conflict between two people who are having a conflict. 7. Use an objective facilitator. Sometimes when this triangulation dynamic is just too intense, it's important to use somebody who's not involved, who can be an objective facilitator, to create conflict resolution between the two people. Also, if triangulation has been something that is perpetuated across an entire group of people, so it's not just one person who's been triangulated, it's the entire group that's being triangulated, then a group meeting needs to be held, where all parties involved in that conflict now are at the table at the same time, and all the issues can be put on the table at the same time, so everybody's actual words can be heard directly instead of indirectly through somebody. This closes the door to any misinterpretation or misrepresentation. The conversation should end with the agreement on specific actions and behaviors that all people will take in order to avoid triangulating in the future. 8. There are very rare situations where the best option in a situation are for two people or more to separate. But this is very rare. That means that what we need to be focused on, regardless of where we fall into this triangulation pattern, is to create resolution so that we can feel a sense of closeness. This means that, almost like a North Star or a guiding light, our goal should always be not only to resolve conflict with ourselves and the other person, but also between two people who are in conflict with each other. Not to gain closeness through someone's opposition with someone else. 9. It's super easy to fall into the trap of triangulation and play directly into it so that relationships are absolutely destroyed. The sad reality is that the minute that somebody comes to you for support in a way where they are triangulating instead of trying to get feedback so as to directly resolve the situation, you're in the triangle. You're in this triangle and filling some role in it, whether you like it or not, and whether you directly chose it or not. Whenever you are dealing with a triangle and you are in any role within that triangle, the question to keep in your mind as a North Star is this. Right here in this statement or action, am I enhancing the triangle or am I helping to unravel the triangle? 10. Develop empathy and compassion. What you'll find in any conflict is that both parties feel like the victim, regardless of whether both are the victims or not. That's their perceptual reality. Here's an example. We may feel like the victim to the fact that somebody is not prioritizing us. But when we step into their perspective, maybe they're not prioritizing us because they have so many pressures on their time and resources. So both of us feel like a victim. And in a way, both of us in this scenario actually are. Empathy is not designed to negate hurt. Meaning, if we empathize with somebody else or see from their perspective, it's not meant to make our perspective or our hurt vanish or go away. That's a competition in pain. But what it's meant to do is to help us relate to the other person. That brings us closer instead of farther apart. Empathy will ensure that we don't cast ourselves or other people in any of the roles of the bad guy, victim, and rescuer dynamic, and simply deal with the conflict at hand as well as the needs that conflict is flushing to the surface. To learn how to do this, watch my video titled Compassion and How to Cultivate Compassion. Triangulation is a dynamic that we see in families, we see it in cultures, we see it in religions, we see it in the whole of society. But triangulation is a dynamic that doesn't benefit us because it keeps us all stuck, and most of all, it divides us. Have a good week.